Hey guys, this is Smithy. Welcome to my channel. Today's video is a very special video. First of all, how did this video come into my mind is only because there's so many holiday releases that are releasing and I am in such a dilemma on what to buy and what not to buy. And that is when Oden'S holiday palettes came into place. They just released it. I mean, I just saw it yesterday, how the palettes look like. And then I saw a bunch of videos from a lot of YouTubers. I'll link a few videos in the description box below for you guys to check it out if you want to see how the palette really looks like. I basically wanted to dupe the vibes of these palettes. There are two palettes actually in the collection. One is called the Christmas Eve palette and the other one is called Merry Christmas palette. Both of them retails at $43.90, so around like $44 I would say. And it launches on October 18th, which is right around the corner. So before it releases, I really wanted to give you like options on if you guys do have these palettes already in your collection, you can give it a thought whether you want to skip it out right now, whether you want to buy it because you do not have these palettes. I am basically helping myself not to buy these palettes because they look absolutely gorgeous and I cannot contain myself. And I'm at like a verge of buying like 2 or 3 palettes more for the entire year for the rest of the months. And oh my God, I cannot contain myself. These palettes are absolutely gorgeous. Now, I will not tell you whether you need to buy it or you do not need to buy it. That's totally on you. This is helping you guys just to figure out whether you need it or not. I went over the swatches on the Oden'S website, on their Instagram, on all the YouTubers that reviewed this palette, and that is when I basically am duping this vibe of these palettes. So let's begin. There was a lot of ramble in the intro, so let's begin with the video. Okay, now you guys might say like, why are you not even wearing an eyeshadow? That's just because it was an impromptu video. I'm going to dupe the vibes and then I'm going to create 2 different eye looks using the dupe vibes of the palettes. Does that make sense? It'll all make sense in the later run. Let's start. I'm going to first start off with the Christmas Eve palette, which I'm so intrigued by, and that's mainly because of the cool tone story. There are pluses and minuses in both of these palettes, in my opinion. Christmas Eve palette is a lot of like cool tone, but I don't wear a lot of blues. So I was thinking whether do I need it or not, but the multi-chromes and all is so gorgeous. Like the shimmers and the multichrome is what like draws me in the Christmas Eve palette. So let's dupe the vibes. I'm gonna go row by row and dupe the vibes on the back of my hand. I feel like that makes the most sense. I'll pop a picture on the side so that you can compare like how it looks as compared to the swatches that I'm gonna do. Now, I would say if you do have these 2 palettes in your collection from BH Cosmetics, which is the Blueberry Muffin palette and Passion in Paris palette, you mostly have a lot of shades out of this palette. I could find 10 out of 16 eyeshadows from these 2 palettes, and rest of the shades are like scattered across the other palettes that I have in my collection. So let's begin. So the first 4 shades, all of them are duped by the Blueberry Muffin palette. The first shade, which is Snowflake, is duped by the shade called Sugared. And then the second shade, Ice Crystal, is duped by the shade Treat. Now, Treat looks a little more like a tad bit more deeper as compared to the other palette. The third shade is called Slivery Dream. With Slivery Dream? Or should it be Silvery Dream? I don't know. Okay, whatever. It's Slivery Dream, which has been duped by the shade called Sweet here. And the fourth shade is Nightfall, which is duped by the shade called Delish here. So let's watch it. So Sugared, and then we have Treat, and then we have Sweet and Delish. And those are the first 4 shadows duped for you guys. And these are all from the Blueberry Muffin palette from BH Cosmetics. Now again, you can find these palettes on the BH Cosmetics website. I know they've shut down, but you can still find it on their website. So yeah, just saying, you might find it on a discount too. And I know a lot of people do have this palette because it's a very highly hyped palette. Okay, let's move on to the next 4 shades. The next shade is called Just Now, and this is being duped by the shade called Dirty Martini from the Glamlite Dirty Martini palette. So let's watch that. That's how it looks. The next shade is called Snow Light, and this is being duped by the Mandalorian palette from Colourpop. And the shade that dupes it is called this, which is called Precious Cargo. So let's swatch that. It's definitely a yellow gold shade, like mixed with a white gold. The next shade in the palette is called Christmas Eve, and this is being duped by this navy blue shade, which is called Montmartre from the Passion in Paris palette from BH Cosmetics. Again, it's a navy blue shade. There you go. And the last shade in that row is called Blue Ice, which is being duped again from the Blueberry Muffin palette. And the shade is called Hot and Fresh here. It appears to be like a silver, but it has like a blue tinge to it. There you go. So that is like the first two rows swatched for you guys. Now let's move on to the third row. The next shade is called Fleeting Time, which is duped by the shade here, The Force from the Mandalorian palette. So let's swatch that. There you go. It's a beautiful gold shade. The next shade is called Nowhere, and this is being duped by the shade called Notre Dame from the Passion in Paris palette. This one, this mauve shade. So let's watch that.
There you go.
The next shade in the palette is called Wonderful, and this is being duped by the shade called Cravings from the Blueberry Muffin palette. It's a beautiful, like a champagne glittery shade. It's not a glitter, it's a shimmery shade. It's very, very pretty. It goes very, very well with that mauve shade. It has like that pinky tinge to it. And there you go. Now the next shade in the palette is called Softly, and that is being duped by the Trick or Treat palette from Sugar Drizzle. And this is duped by the shade called Dinosaur Egg, and this is like a mustardy yellow green shade. This seems like out of place in that palette, I would say, just because, I mean, the rest of the palette is all like cool tone, and this appears to be leaning towards warm tone, I would say. It's like a yellowish green shade. There you go. The next shade in the palette is called Lemon Tart, and this is being duped by my Yallternative palette from Wicked Widow Beauty, this one. And that's only because I have very, very less yellow shades, and this is not like a matte yellow. It has like a, it's a yellow with like a sheen running throughout it, and I felt like this is the closest that I can get. And this is duped by the shade called Wild West. This also has like the sheen running throughout it. So I'm gonna swatch this. There you go. The next shade in the palette is called Gorgeous, and this is the multichrome shade in that palette, and this is being duped by another Oden'S Hummingbird palette, which they collaborated with Tina from Fancy Phrase. And the multichrome is very, very similar to this multichrome. It's like a pink and a purple and a green all together. So I'm going to swatch this. At my end, I see a lot of like purple and green, and I'm pretty sure you see a lot of pink. It's a very, very pretty shade. Can you see that? Can you see that purple? Very pretty. The next shade in the palette is called Night Sky, and this is being duped by this royal green shade, and this is called Tuileries, I think. I'm really sorry if I'm butchering that name, but it is this shade. So let's watch that. There you go. And the last shade in the palette is called Blue Star, and this is being duped by another Blueberry Muffin shade. And this is duped by the shade called Tempting here, which is like a blue purple shade. So let's watch that. There you go. Such a pretty shade. And that is the entire palette swatched for you guys. Very, very beautiful color story, especially if you are like a cool tone person. I feel like you'll absolutely love this. Okay, now let's move on to the Merry Christmas palette. Now this is a more traditional red green palette. The first shade was the most difficult for me to like dupe. I don't think I have like a very similar color shade in my collection, so ignore that. I would say I know a few shades that are very, very similar, but I personally do not have it. I'll list a few in the description box below for you guys, and these are all from like indie brands. So the first shade in the palette is called Elf Wish, and this basically I duped from my Cool Summer palette from It's Belle Cosmetics, but I had to mix and match two shades. The shades that I'm mixing is Summer Nights and Pink Lemonade, because it has definitely that green, glowy green shade, but it also has like a shift of pink. So I'm gonna mix these two together. The next two shades are from the Oden'S Red Dragon palette. Now I would say there's a lot of shades that have from this palette that has been like, you can find a similar vibes from the Red Dragon palette. If you have it, I feel like you don't need this palette. But yeah, that's up to you. The next shade in the palette is called Matcha Cookies, and this is being duped by the shade called Jade. And the next shade in the palette is called Jingle Bell, and this shade is being duped by the shade called Solar Flare. So let's watch that. So that's Matcha Cookies and Jingle Bell. And that's how the first three shades look like. Ignore these swatches from the previous swatches. I could not remove it. It did stain my arm. I hope that's not a distraction. The next shade in the palette is called New Leaf, and that is also duped by this palette, which is the Cool Summer palette from It's Belle. And the shade that dupes it is called Margarita, this bluey like pastel-y shade. So let's watch that. There you go. The next shade in the palette is called Snowman, and that is being duped by this shade, which is Pure from the Gourmand Girls Ethereal palette. This definitely looks like a white, but it has like a green shift to it, a strong green, I would say. So let's watch that. But it has like a pink flip also. I hope you can see that. The next shade in the palette is called Best Wish, again from the Cool Summer palette. And the shade that dupes it is called Pistachio Sundae, this green pastel shade. So let's watch that. I don't know how much you can see it in the camera or not, but this is definitely more blue and this is green. The next shade in the palette is called Christmas Tree, and this is being duped by my Dirty Martini palette from Glamlite, and the shade that dupes it is called Mix It Up here. So let's watch that. Beautiful, like a tealy green shade. The next shade in the palette is called New Year, and this is also duped by this Glamlite Dirty Martini palette, and the shade is called Gin. This beautiful shimmery green shade. So let's watch that. There you go. It's like a shimmery emerald green shade. The next shade in the palette is called Little Star, and again it is duped by the Red Dragon palette, and the shade is called Overhead. Here, this one. So let's watch that. And if you do not have this Red Dragon palette, there's a similar shade in the Cool Summer palette from It's Belle also. And the shade that dupes it is called Summer Glow. So whatever palette you have with you will like serve the purpose, I would say. It's closer to Overhead rather than Summer Glow. Just because Summer Glow is a little more on the pink side and Overglow is definitely more on like the rose gold side. The next shade in the palette is called Gingerbread, and this is also duped by the Red Dragon palette, and the shade is called Sunrise. So let's swatch that. And there's another similar shade from the Melt Amore Mariposa palette, and the shade would be Mensaje, this one. I'm just giving you all the option just because if you have one or the other, you can definitely dupe the vibes. And that's how it looks. The next shade in the palette is called Bless, and this is another shade that has been duped by the Ethereal palette from Gourmand Girls. And the shade that dupes it is called Dream, and this is like a pink shimmer shade. So let's watch that. It'll pop definitely a little more on like a glitter glue, but still very, very pretty shade. The last shade in that row is called Pinsettia. I think so. I don't know. It's a royal red shade, and this is being duped by this shade, which is called Abrazos from the Amore Mariposa palette. So let's watch that. It's like a true red shade. Again, another one. Let me swatch this first. This shade would be very, very similar. If you do have the Red Dragon palette, you also have a red here. And this is called Dragon. The first shade in the last row is called Hot Cocoa, and this is more like a deeper maroon shade. And this I am duping it with this shade called Nueva Vida from the Amore Mariposa palette. Again, there's another shade in the Red Dragon palette which is called Fire, which dupes the vibe of this shade really, really well. And it is this shade. It's like a deeper maroon red shade. So let's swatch this. As soon as I saw this palette like revealed, Amore Mariposa definitely did come to my mind, just because these tones are very, very common in like Melt's line. So if you do have like that, I don't know, what is that called? The other skeleton palette, the green palette from Melt, I feel like you can definitely dupe the vibes here from that palette too. I do not have that. That's why I'm like dipping into a few palettes. The next shade in that palette is called All Right, and this is more of like an orangey gold shimmer shade, and this is being duped by this shade which is called Just a Splash from the Dirty Martini palette from Glamlite. So I'm going to swatch this. Very pretty shade. Really, really pretty color story. 2 more shades to go. The next shade in the palette is called Happy Ending, and this is basically like a matte black shade. You can just dip into any matte black you have in the collection. I have this right in front of me, so I'm going to dip into this, and this is the Giant Folds palette from Oden'S, and this I'm duping it with this shade which is Annihilation, which is another matte black shade. So let's watch that right there. And the last shade in the palette is called Santa Star, and this is basically like a grungy yellow gold shade, and this has been duped another shade from the Ethereal palette from Gourmand Girls, and this I'm duping it with this shade which is called Emerge. So let's watch that. Very pretty yellow gold shade, but with like a bronzy touch to it. And that's how it looks. And this is the entire palette swatched for you guys, duping the vibes of the Merry Christmas palette from the Oden'S Holiday Collection 2022. Now I'm going to show you both the palettes in the outside lighting too, just so that you can see how both the palettes looks under the sunlight, and you can see all the shifts in the dimension and the sparkly effect that I captured from these palettes. But yeah, I feel like if you do have these palettes already in your collection, you can make a choice for yourself whether you actually do need these palettes or not. But now, without further ado, let's move on to the eye looks using this palette. I'm going to put a music and then run over it very quickly. And those are my 2 looks that I created for you guys. I really hope that you guys enjoyed both the eye looks that I created for you guys, and you enjoyed the dupe video that I created, just duping the vibes of the holiday palettes from Oden's eye. If you did like this video, if you do like dupe videos and to create like a similar vibe of the newest palette releases, to just help you guys whether you need that palette or not. If you did like it, you know what to do. Do give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you're notified every time that I post next. I generally upload 3 videos every single week, every Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays at 9 AM Eastern Standard Time. Until next time, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.